Without knowing she was doing it, Amy freed her arm from Axel's grip and stood alone, looking out at the ground and the domes beyond. Then, feeling somehow numb, she left him and went to sit on the nearest empty bench. Her eyes focused on a crack in the red brick sidewalk, but she was unaware of seeing that. She felt nothing but an odd euphoria, as if she'd just seen something horribly funny but didn't understand the joke. If anyone had spoken to her then, she might have begun to giggle helplessly, as if her mental computer had shorted out from overloading. After a time, Axel came and sat beside her. She paid no attention to him until he folded forward and put his head between his knees. She noticed that and wondered why he was doing it. "Do you feel faint, son?" A white-haired man in blue sat down next to the boy and held a gleaming vial beneath Axel's face. He was the oldest and the biggest person Amy had ever seen. "Breathe in," he ordered. "Good. Now you, young lady." A sharp, clean scent went up her nose and threatened to make her choke. She turned her head away, but the old man kept the tube beneath her nose. "It's anti-trom," he told her. "Nothing fancy. I use it a lot myself." The gas blurred and softened thought. Nothing seemed to matter quite so much. As she looked at the old man, he seemed as kind as the woman in yellow had been, and for as little reason. "What did you do that for?" she asked. "For? You look sick. What have you two been doing?" "Looking at the outside." He smiled as if she had said something funny. "No wonder." He capped the vial and tucked it in his shirt pocket. "Makes me a little sick to look at it, too. It's the everlasting sameness that gets to you. The trick is to not think about it." The old man stood up. He was very tall, and as she looked up at him, Amy wondered how he could live on her level. He would be constantly bumping his head. He'd never fit the bunks. He returned her stare, and a quizzical expression appeared on his face. "You two weren't thinking of trying to get outside, were you?" When neither answered, he shook his head in disapproval. "So you were. People your age often do. Should know better. There is no way out, you know. Even if there were, you'd die out there." "That's not true," said Axel. "But it is, son." The man sat down beside Axel again and patiently tried to explain. "Granted, the air is clear again, but if you could get out, where would you go? What would you do? The city stretches on forever, and there is nowhere to walk. Besides, what's the point? There's nothing out there." "There is, beyond the city," Axel insisted. The old man shook his head again, sadly this time. "There is no beyond, son. Domes like ours cover everything except the oceans. I'm old and I know. I've seen a lot in my time." "But I live—" Axel caught his near mistake and altered what he was going to say. "But if everything is city, where does the food come from?" "Why, from farms down below," the old man told him and gestured at the surface outside. "That's all farms under there. Floor after floor of nothing but hydroponic farms. They're all automated. Crops grow under lights and in the water from the rain. Rainwater collects and runs down the grates around the outer edges of the domes. Nothing is wasted. The sewage—" He regarded the two of them skeptically. "You should have been taught that by this time. Are you sure you weren't?" "I never was," Amy said in all honesty. "Do you think there are people down there? In the subsurface levels?" When she nodded, he chuckled. "You've been told those old horror stories too. I used to enjoy them when I was your age, about all the people who lived down below in darkness and gloom. They used to give me nightmares. I must have been 15 before I quit believing they existed." Amy and Axel exchanged glances. It was impossible to tell if this man believed what he was saying, or if it was the kind of lie adults told children. "Do you know?" Amy was being as careful as she could be. "Did people ever live in what did you call them? Subsurface levels?" "Apparently they did," the man said. "Long time ago, before the domes were built. They thought it would be more energy efficient to live underground, back when you couldn't breathe the air outside and the sun made people sick. But when things got better and the domes got built, the people who had to live down there protested. There were evidently some bloody battles, riots and all, but the authorities settled things." "Who fought who?" Axel asked, and the old man shook his head. "I don't know. Since history was removed from the learning centers, everyone's forgotten the old stuff. Happened before I was born. Long before you were born. Doesn't really matter. It's all past now and forgotten. Nobody lives that way anymore. Everything's the same now. The three sat in silence for a time, each lost in thought until Amy said, "I think we should go," and Axel reluctantly stood up. "You youngsters have come a long way," their new friend said, rising too. "How can you tell?" asked Amy. "Do we look different?" He smiled, glad of the chance to display his years of wisdom. "Most people wouldn't notice it, of course, and it's not that you look much different. But your speech is different. I've learned, depending on what group of domes people come from, they have their own way of talking. Like you two. Only the funny thing is, you both have different accents." "Oh," said Amy, and resolved to talk as little as possible. "Well, goodbye." "Does he really believe all that?" she asked, when they were safely out of the old man's sight. "About nobody's living down below, and the farms and all?" "We didn't know what was up there," Axel reminded her. "No, just the stories. No one believes." "Then it's not what he believes either, but what he's been taught," Axel reasoned. "And if you're not taught the truth, you don't know. Like we didn't know we had to come all the way up here to reach the surface." "But somebody knows. The woman at the ramp knew. The authorities know." "Or else the guards wouldn't have shown up at the ramp," he agreed. "But they probably don't tell most of the people here, just the ones who have to know." "I wonder how they manage that." "The same way they keep people downstairs from finding out about this place, probably." Axel turned around and walked backward to see if they were being followed. Amy tried to emulate him and nearly fell over her own feet. "How do you do that?" she asked, impressed. "Easy." They were following the park rim of the dome, heading towards one of the glass tunnels connecting this dome to the next. You tell your feet to walk backward, and you practice a lot. And after a while, they do it. Don't you bump into people? You practice where there aren't any people. Oh. She couldn't imagine a place like that. "Do you think he's right about there being no way to get outside?" she asked. "Maybe we should find your freight shaft. At least, that might connect with the freight belt." "It's got to be in that warehouse," he said. "But then we'd have to go down into the darkness again." He seemed so upset by the idea that she felt sorry for him. "The old man's probably wrong anyhow," she said. "Like about the rest of the stuff he told us. He sounded like that man in the depot the day we got your ear guards. The one who said we'd never see outside." "But this man's nicer. I wasn't afraid he'd hit me." "Maybe it's not that he's any nicer, just that he lives an easier life," Amy speculated. They walked along in silence for a long time. The people they passed paid no attention to them, and Amy gradually stopped glancing over her shoulder to see if they were being followed. Axel was preoccupied with watching the sky, as if he could never get enough of it. "Eastgate." She read the neon word above the entrance to the passage. "That's a pretty name." "East?" Axel said. "We want to go west." "We do?" "That's where I come from. East just takes me farther away." "Oh." Amy's sense of direction was limited to right and left and up or down level. As far as she was concerned, they had found a perfectly good exit, and Axel was being picky. "What's west?" "That way," he pointed. "It's always opposite. Besides, you can tell by the sun. It rises in the east and goes down in the west." "Oh." It made no sense to her yet, but she filed that rule away to mull over later. "So let's cut through the park and see if we can find a glass tunnel like this on the other side of the dome." Amy hesitated and then said, "Okay," because it seemed to matter so much to him. "But let's go down to Eastgate first. Maybe there's a hall that connects with the other traffic." "Don't say hall up here," he advised in a warning whisper. "Say street. Hall is something different here from what we think it is." "Oh, how about corridor?" "Don't say that either." "What else can't I say?" asked Amy, made uneasy by having something more to worry about and thinking she liked Axel better when he was less bossy. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "We won't talk much." "I was just talking to you, not strangers." "Don't be mad. We have to think of those things." Eastgate did empty into an avenue that cut through the park and stretched the width of the dome. They could see the opposite exit in the distance. It was less than a 15-minute walk, but it seemed far to her once they left the trees behind. The higher the roof overhead, the more exposed she felt, and more edgy. For the first time, she wondered if she really wanted to go outside, if she could get over this fear of openness. When she looked up and saw that empty space, it made her want to find a safe hole somewhere and curl up, like Axel. "Are you hungry?" His questions interrupted her thoughts. "Starving." "Me too. It's all this exercise. I wish we still had my mush cakes. I wish we had spare ribs and beans and cornbread and coleslaw and noodles." "Is all that food?" He nodded. "You'd like it, Amy. It's so good. When we get home, we'll get you all kinds of good things to eat." He grinned over at her. "It's going to be fun showing you all the things you've never had. You can live with us and..." "Who's us?" "My parents and brother, and Ty and Margot's parents, Oki and Ben. And they have a baby." "A real baby?" She hadn't seen a baby since she was 3 years old. "Yeah, it's cute, and, well, it may not be a baby by now." "Will they want me there? It costs a lot to keep a non-worker. Water costs, food costs." She was reciting her mother's litany to cover her fear that it was her own person who would be unwelcome. "They'll want you," he assured her. "They'll be so glad to meet you." She gave him a weak smile, pretending to believe him, and changed the subject by pointing to a building they were passing. "That looks deserted," she said. And it did. Holes gaped where windows had been. The entrance was bricked up. A large crack ran from the base to halfway up the face of the structure. "One fell down there." Axel pointed toward a pile of rubble where several people were working, stacking brick onto small, sturdy flatbed trucks. "Maybe it shakes up here at night, too. But this doesn't look half as old as down level," she finished the remark in a careful whisper. "A lot of down level is cut out of solid rock," Axel informed her. "It wasn't built so much as it was tunneled out. All the corner blocks are solid rock. So are the ramps." From the center of the glass tunnel they could see in all directions. The old man's insistence that the city was endless looked true. Domes went all the way to the horizon. They were standing there looking when a klaxon began to honk somewhere down the way. All at once all the people walking in the tunnel veered over to the walls and stood, looking out. The klaxon stopped. "It must be a warning of some kind," Amy whispered. "But what are they looking for?" Axel squinted against the sun. "I can't see anything." Amy sneaked a glance at the people closest to her. They were staring down at the ground. 2 had their eyes closed. Maybe it was some kind of rest period. The hiss of wheels on pavement made her turn. The biggest car she had ever seen was speeding through the tunnel. The car was silver, and under its bubble top rode a driver with 2 large people in the rear seat. The people were dressed in white with sparkly things around their necks. "Oh!" a shocked voice beside her said. An arm reached out and pulled her against the wall. "Don't look at them! You know that's not allowed. What if they saw? Someone I knew once looked at them. You should know better." The car passed before Amy could see more, and she was very disappointed as well as scared. "I'm sorry," she told the woman. "What were you thinking of, child? Suppose they stopped." "What would happen?" said Axel. "You looked too. I saw you," the woman accused him. "Don't think that just because these 2 are more lenient than the last that they aren't the same. And your mouth won't help you if they decide to make an example of your disobedience." The klaxon interrupted her berating, and when it stopped, she turned and almost ran away, as if not wanting to be seen associating with them. "What was that all about?" Axel whispered as they walked on. "I don't know. They must have been authorities in the car. But we never had to hide our faces." Amy felt a stranger's arm encircle her shoulder. A hand closed upon her upper arm, and even as she tried to jerk away, the grip tightened to a trap. "Don't make a scene," a woman's voice murmured above her. Amy tried to twist free and was held more tightly. Beside her, she saw Axel struggling with the tall young man who caught her frightened glance and said, "It's all right, Amy. The authorities want to meet you." They knew her name. They were authorities. That could only mean one thing. They were caught and going to be sent back down below to rehabilitation. They would make her normal. Amy did what any self-respecting rat would do when cornered. She bit.